They say the view from the top is breathtaking, but they never tell you how thin the air is. My name is Julian Vane, and today I was supposed to become the most powerful man in the city. The Pierre Hotel was suffocating. Every surface was covered in white roses, thousands of them symbolizing a purity that didn't exist in this room. I stood at the mirror, adjusting a bow tie that felt like a noose. Behind me, my reflection looked like a stranger, a billionaire, a success story, a lie. "Julian, it's time." Elena stood in the doorway, my bride. Her dress was a masterpiece of lace and silk, costing more than the house I grew up in. But when she looked at me, she wasn't looking at a man. She was looking at a portfolio. "The cameras from CNBC are in the back," she said, her voice as polished as a diamond. "Try to look happy. If the stock dips during the vows, my father will be furious." I didn't answer. I just followed her. The music began a heavy, orchestral version of a love song that felt more like a march. As I reached the altar, I felt the eyes of 1,000 elite guests on my back. They were here for the spectacle, for the merger. And then, the doors at the back of the hall didn't just open, they slammed. The music faltered. A man stumbled into the light. He was a shadow against the gold-leafed walls, disheveled, shivering, and clutching a rusted metal box to his chest, like it was a holy relic. I heard the gasps. I saw Elena's father signal for security, but I couldn't move. My heart, which I thought had turned to stone years ago, gave a violent thud, because I knew that man, and I knew that box. 15 years ago, I didn't own a tuxedo. I owned a 2004 sedan with a broken heater and a trunk full of dreams that were rotting. I was an intern by day and a ghost by night, sleeping in parking lots. Arthur was the man who lived on the corner of the lot. He was a veteran with eyes that had seen too much, but a heart that hadn't seen enough bitterness. "You're shivering, kid," he'd told me one January night when the temperature hit 0. He didn't offer me money, he didn't have any. He offered me half of a stale ham sandwich and a wool blanket that smelled of wood smoke. For 2 years, Arthur was my only board of directors. He was the one who told me to keep going when the first 3 banks rejected my startup loan. "Success is a ladder, Julian," he used to say, his voice raspy from the cold. "Just don't forget who held the base for you while you were climbing." Now, here he was, at my wedding. Security grabbed his arms, pulling him toward the exit. "Julian!" Arthur cried out. His voice was weaker now, aged by a decade of hard pavement. "Julian, the box! I kept it! They're coming for it! Get that trash out of here!" Elena's father shouted. I looked at Elena. She looked disgusted. "Julian, don't you dare," she hissed. "Ignore him. The priest is waiting." I looked at the man who had fed me when I was starving. Then I looked at the merger standing next to me. I realized that if I stayed at this altar, I wasn't becoming a king. I was becoming a prisoner. "Stop," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. "Let him go." The room went silent. The security guards froze. I stepped off the dais. "Julian, if you walk away from this altar, there is no coming back," Elena's father warned. "The merger is dead. Your reputation is dead." I didn't even look back. I walked down the aisle, past the shocked socialites, and knelt in the dirt on Arthur's tattered coat. "Arthur," I whispered, "I'm here." He looked at me, his eyes clearing for a moment. He handed me the rusted box. It was heavy, vibrating with the weight of the past. "I saved it, Julian. I knew you'd need your heart back." I stood up, holding the box, and looked at the crowd. I saw the cameras recording every second. I saw the merger crumbling in real time. "The wedding is over," I announced to the room. "The party is finished, but for the first time in 10 years, the man is back." I walked out of that hotel, with Arthur under one arm and the rusted box under the other. I left behind the billions, the bride, and the lies. But as we sat in the back of my car, far from the flashing bulbs, Arthur's hands began to shake. "They're not just letters, Julian," he rasped. "Look under the lining. Look at what they did to us." I opened the box, and that's when I realized my wedding hadn't been interrupted by a beggar. It had been interrupted by a witness. The silence of my penthouse was a world away from the chaos of the Pierre Hotel. Arthur sat on my Italian leather sofa, his tattered jacket looking out of place, but his presence feeling more right than any of my billionaire colleagues ever had. I looked at the box. Arthur's words echoed, "Look under the lining." With a pocket knife, I pried back the felt bottom of the rusted container. I expected more letters from my mother. I expected nostalgia. I didn't expect a ledger. It was a series of internal memos from Blackwood Holdings, my almost father-in-law's company. As I scanned the pages, my blood turned to ice. They weren't just business notes. They were the eviction plans for the very district where I had grown up. The memos detailed a plan to intentionally cut power and water to the low-income housing units to force the residents out. It was illegal. It was heartless. And at the bottom of the order, to clear the lot at any cost, was the signature of the man whose daughter I had nearly married. Arthur looked at me with tears in his eyes. "That fire, Julian. The one that took your mother's last belongings and sent me to the streets for good. It wasn't an accident. They wanted the land for their luxury condos. I found the box in the rubble after the cleaners left. I've been running with it ever since." I realized then that my rise to wealth had been overseen by the very people who had manufactured my poverty. The merger wasn't a partnership. It was a way for them to bury the evidence of their crimes inside my company. Most billionaires would have called their lawyers. I called the press. But first, I needed to ensure Arthur was safe. I bought an entire floor of a private medical facility under a shell company. "You held the base of the ladder, Arthur," I told him, as the nurses took him in. "Now, I'm building you a house at the top." By the next morning, the billionaire groom was the only thing on the news. Elena's father, Marcus Blackwood, issued a statement claiming I had suffered a mental breakdown. He tried to freeze my personal accounts. He tried to lock me out of my own building. But he forgot one thing. I didn't build my company on inherited wealth. I built it on the streets. I knew how to fight when there was nothing left to lose. I walked into the Blackwood headquarters alone. No security, no lawyers, just the rusted box. Marcus was in the boardroom, surrounded by his directors, laughing about how they would restructure my company now that I was unstable. I walked to the head of the table and dropped the ledger in front of him. "The fire on 5th and Main," I said. The room went silent. "I have the signatures, Marcus. I have the timestamps. And as of 10 minutes ago, the district attorney has the digital copies." The fallout was tectonic. The Blackwood empire collapsed within a week. Elena, the woman who valued a stock price over a soul, disappeared from the social scene, her name forever tied to her father's disgrace. My own company took a hit, but something strange happened. The public didn't see an unstable CEO. They saw a man. Our sales tripled. People wanted to support someone who remembered where he came from. 2 months later, I stood in front of a new apartment complex, not a luxury condo, but a beautiful, sun-drenched home for veterans and those the city had forgotten. Arthur stood beside me, wearing a suit that actually fit him. He looked 10 years younger. "You did it, kid," he said, looking at the plaque on the building that read, "The Maria Vane Memorial Home." I looked at the rusted box, now sitting in a glass display case in the lobby. It was empty now. The letters were framed in my office, and the ledger was in a police evidence locker. I had lost a wedding, a merger, and a fake reputation. But as Arthur and I sat on the front porch, sharing a sandwich this time, a fresh one, I realized I had finally found what I was looking for during all those years on the street. I wasn't just a billionaire anymore. I was finally home. They say every man has a price. I'm just glad mine was one I could finally afford to pay. The penthouse was silent, save for the hum of the city 40 floors below. Arthur sat on the edge of my designer sofa, his hands shaking as he held a crystal glass of water. He looked like a ghost in a palace of gold. I sat across from him, the rusted box resting on the marble coffee table between us. It looked like a scar on a perfect surface. "I never wanted to bring this to you, Julian," he said, his voice trembling. "I wanted you to have your perfect life. But when I saw your face on the news, when I saw who you were marrying, I knew I couldn't let you become one of them." I didn't understand yet. I thought he meant the wealthy. I thought he was talking about class. I was wrong. "One of who, Arthur?" I asked. "I've worked for everything I have. I'm not like the others." "It's not about the money, son," he said. "It's about blood. Look under the lining. Really look." I took a silver letter opener and carefully pried back the rotting felt at the bottom of the box. My heart hammered against my ribs. Beneath the fabric lay a stack of yellowed, translucent paper blueprints and internal memos from 20 years ago. At the top of the stack was a logo I saw every single day: Blackwood Holdings, the company owned by Marcus Blackwood, my father-in-law. I began to read. These weren't just business plans. They were clearance strategies. I saw my childhood address, Building 4C highlighted in red. Next to it was a handwritten note: "Utility termination failed. Proceed to Phase 2. Accelerated vacancy." Phase 2 was a fire. They knew, I whispered. They knew people were still inside. My mother was still inside. "I was the night watchman for that block, Julian," Arthur said. "I saw the men in the black SUVs. I saw them leave just before the smoke started. I found that box in the manager's office after they cleared out. I've spent 20 years hiding it, waiting for someone with enough power to actually use it." I looked at Arthur, this man who had lived under bridges and fought for scraps, all while holding the evidence that could have made him a millionaire if he had just used it for blackmail. But he didn't. He kept it for me. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The woman I was supposed to marry, the man I was going to partner with, they weren't just business rivals. They were the architects of my tragedy. My life hadn't been a rags to riches story. It had been a long, calculated game of chess, and I was about to hand the kings my crown. Before I could even process the rage, my phone exploded. 42 missed calls, 118 texts. The most recent was a video message from Elena. I hit play. She wasn't crying. She was sitting in the back of a limousine, her wedding makeup perfectly intact, her eyes cold as ice. "I don't know what kind of stunt you're pulling, Julian," she said, "but you have 1 hour to get to the hotel and fix this. My father is already talking to the board. If you aren't there to sign the merger papers, we will liquidate your holdings before the sun comes up. Don't throw away $1 billion for a homeless man." I looked at the screen, then back at the rusted box. For the first time in my life, the $1 billion felt like a weight I was finally ready to drop. "Arthur," I said, "I need you to do something for me. I'm going to call a car. I want you to go to the 14th precinct. Don't talk to anyone but the district attorney. Tell them Julian Vane sent you, and hold on to that box like it's your life." "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm going to go sign those papers." The car ride back to the Pierre Hotel felt longer than the 15 years that had led me there. Arthur was already gone, headed for the 14th precinct with the box locked in his grip, like it was the last thing tethering him to solid ground. I had nothing in my hands now. No evidence, no proof, just the memory of what I'd read, burned into me the way the fire had burned through Building 4C 2 decades ago. I walked back into that ballroom, and the silence that greeted me was different this time. Elena's father stood at the head table, flanked by lawyers who looked like they'd been assembled in the time it took me to leave and return. Elena herself sat rigid in her chair, arms crossed, her makeup still flawless, her eyes daring me to explain myself. "You're late," Marcus Blackwood said, sliding a stack of merger papers across the table. "But you're here. That's all that matters. Sign, and we forget this ever happened." I picked up the pen. I let it hover over the signature line, just long enough for the room to believe I might actually do it. Then I set it down. "I know about Building 4C, I said. The room didn't gasp this time. It went still, in a different waz. The stillness of people who suddenly understand they're not in control anymore. Marcus's expression didn't change, but his hand, resting on the table, curled into a fist. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Phase 2, I said. Accelerated vacancy. Utility termination failed, so you moved to fire. My mother was in that building. I was 11 years old, and I watched it burn from across the street, because your company decided a few dead tenants were cheaper than a delayed construction timeline." Elena's lawyers started talking over each other. Marcus raised a hand to silence them, but his composure was cracking at the edges now. A man watching a life's work catch up to him in real time. "You have no proof," he said quietly. "Whatever story some vagrant told you, it's not evidence. It's the ramblings of a man who's been living on the street for 20 years. That vagrant," I said, "is on his way to the district attorney's office right now, with the original memos, the blueprints, and your signature on the order. He's had it for 20 years, Marcus. He could have sold it. He could have blackmailed you into oblivion and lived like a king. Instead, he kept it safe for the one person he thought might actually do something right with it." I turned to Elena. She wasn't looking at her father anymore. She was looking at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something other than calculation in her face. It might have been fear. It might have been the beginning of understanding what she'd almost married into. "The wedding's over," I told her. "It's been over since a man in a torn coat walked through those doors. You just didn't know it yet. I walked out of that hotel a second time, and this time I didn't look back at all. The fallout was tectonic." Within 48 hours, the district attorney's office had opened a formal investigation into Blackwood Holdings. Working from documents an anonymous elderly man had personally delivered and refused to leave until he'd handed them to someone with a badge. The financial press tore the story apart piece by piece. Within a week, Marcus Blackwood's empire had collapsed under the weight of 2 decades of buried paperwork. Elena disappeared from the social pages entirely, her name now permanently stitched to her father's disgrace. My own company took a hit at first headlines calling me unstable, unpredictable, a billionaire who'd walked out on his own wedding over the word of a homeless man. But something strange happened in the weeks that followed. The public didn't see instability. They saw a man who'd been handed a chance to bury his past in comfort and chose to dig it up instead. Our numbers didn't fall, they tripled. People wanted to stand behind someone who remembered exactly where he came from. 2 months later, I stood in front of a new building, on the same block where Building 4C had once stood. Not luxury condos, not the development Blackwood had killed for, but a sun-drenched home for veterans, and the people this city had spent years pretending not to see. Arthur stood beside me in a suit that actually fit him, looking 10 years younger than the man who'd stumbled through those wedding doors. "You did it, kid," he said, looking up at the plaque above the entrance. It read, "The Maria Vane Memorial Home." The rusted box sat behind glass in the lobby now, empty, its work finally finished. The letters were framed in my office. The ledger was locked away as evidence in a case that would put men in prison for a fire they thought no one would ever trace back to them. I had lost a wedding, a merger, and a reputation built on other people's silence. But sitting on that porch with Arthur, sharing a sandwich that wasn't stale this time, I understood that I'd finally found what I'd been looking for during all those years on the street. I wasn't just a billionaire anymore. I was finally home. They say every man has a price. I'm just glad mine was one I could finally afford to pay. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories like this one every week. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. I wasn't just a billionaire anymore. I was finally home. They say every man has a price. I'm just glad mine was one I could finally afford to pay. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories like this one every week. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.